Hey, what's up, friends? Grant Bolden here. Welcome back to the Speaker Lab podcast. Good to have you here with us today. All right, we got not one but two guests. This is not something we normally do, but these guys are inseparable. It's kind of a package duo. And this episode could be confusing, okay, because we're going to be talking with Eric and Eli from Speaker Labs up in Canada. All right, so they're the Canadian version of us. We've debated before who came first, and so we'll just leave that up for debate for now. I think we started around the same time, but nonetheless, we have two different companies representing Speaker. We are the Speaker Lab. They are Speaker Labs, two different companies. But nonetheless, Eric, Eli, good to have you guys with us today. Thanks for joining us.
So good to have you here too, or I guess I should say, so good to be here.
Thanks for
probably a lot. Probably a lot more appropriate. It's funny. We heard about you long before we met, and we were always wondering who's going to send the other company the cease and desist letter first. Instead, we've developed a friendship just so much.
But it doesn't mean we're not going to fire some cease and desist letter at you sometime. We're just trying to build some trust before we send it off to you. Now, we recently got actually, I don't have it here with me. We got from the Trademark and Patent Office, we got the Speaker Lab. Well, no, actually, we do. Okay, look here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that. Look here. The Speaker Lab something. But I'm assuming this is not going to carry any weight in Canada whatsoever. So, oh well.
That is
every time I think about the Speaker Lab and Speaker Labs, I just play the scene from The Social Network over in my head. Yes. When they're talking about drop the in Facebook and stuff. Yeah. It's so funny.
Yeah, maybe we have to keep it now just to keep it separate. Now, we are both in the speaking industry, but we also do slightly different things. So why don't you give us some context here? What does Speaker Labs do?
Basically, we make people amazing public speakers, and we try to do it faster than anyone else can do it. So, you teach people all about the business of public speaking. We don't focus on that really at all. We just help people with their public speaking skills. We transform them into dynamic, capable, awesome public speakers.
And you guys typically are doing this, a lot of what we're doing is a lot of virtual coaching training. A lot of what you guys are doing is mostly in person. Is that fair? Is that accurate?
I'd say it's predominantly in person. We have a decent amount of our clients asking for virtual trainings and stuff, but predominantly we're doing in-person stuff. Pre-pandemic, it was 100% in person. Yeah. Post-pandemic, actually, let's say during the thick of the pandemic, it was 100% virtual. Yeah. And now that we've emerged on the other side, we've got a decent combination. I'd say probably classic 80-20 thing going on there.
Gotcha. Now, for context here, you guys are working on like the art of speaking. Are you working primarily with like full-time professional speakers who are in and out or doing this day in and day out? Or are you working more with corporations and let's say an executive or CEO who I'm giving a presentation a couple of times a year and I want to make sure it looks polished and the company needs to make sure it's represented well? Who are you typically working with?
The majority of the work that we do is with teams at companies. For example, a leader will say, I know that my team would be a lot more effective in their day-to-day, in their roles, if they were better presenters, if they were amazing public speakers. So that's one group of people that we work with. And then there are two other groups of people that we work with too. We help professional speakers who are already professional and they're already getting paid for speaking gigs. We help them build their next talk. We help them become even better at public speaking. And we also help aspiring professional speakers who know that there's a little bit of an itch within them. They want to start speaking more on stages, at conferences, whatever the case may be, but they don't yet feel like they're ready. They don't feel like they have their talk, or they don't feel like they're dynamic enough. They know they have to get to another level. We help those people too. So it's sort of three different groups. It's corporate teams, it's aspiring speakers, and it's people who are already speakers.
Gotcha. And like I alluded to earlier, you guys are kind of a package duo. And so walk us through, like, how'd you guys connect? What's your backgrounds? How did you get into this in the first place?
Well, how we connected is we could go all the way back. Like Eric and I think, have known each other since we were 5 years old, but our true love didn't really blossom until we were in business school together.
Okay.
And it was funny, at the business school we went to, it's called the Ivy Business School. They seated people alphabetically by first name. And so the two E's, we got seated beside each other. We knew each other. We had been acquaintances for a long time, but that's where the real true love blossomed. And then when we graduated from business school, both Eric and I started our careers as professors, and we taught business at the business school that we had graduated from. And it's sort of the thing that triggered our love for both teaching and for speaking and communicating and presenting in front of a group, because we had to do it. We were sort of thrown into the fire and had to figure out the skills for ourselves. And we just became obsessed with communication and public speaking and presentation skills and figuring out every little thing we could to be better at it. We would talk about it a lot. And we also fell in love with teaching. So after a brief stint working in the business world, we actually worked for the same high growth tech startup in Toronto. And we got a sense of what it was like to work inside of a business, not just to teach the concepts behind business. We decided, hey, what if we blended our love of teaching, our love of public speaking, and our love of business and started a business teaching public speaking? So
kind of a meta thing. And I know I hear that a lot too, of just kind of like, oh, you're speaking about speaking. And like, yeah. So, okay. So one thing I'm curious on is like, all right, someone comes to you, whether it's a full-time speaker or an aspiring speaker or, a company or a team, and they're going like, okay, I know I need to get better as a speaker and as a communicator, but like, what's the process you guys typically walk someone through? Like, where do you even begin? Because there's, obviously like a wide spectrum of people who are amazing and just need to go from, 90, 95% up to the next couple of percentage points that go from amazing to insanely good. And other people that you see speak for the first time, like, ooh, we got some work to do here. So like, what are you guys typically looking for? And what's the process that you take people through?
I guess setting the foundation is really important. And one of the reasons that people are directionless in their pursuit of becoming better at public speaking is because they get something wrong. They think that public speaking is a skill. Our belief is that it's not. It's actually a category of skills. And once people recognize that it's a category of skills, then they can focus on the skills within the category one by one, and then eventually put them all together to become better. So it's important to start there with that misconception, and then to open people's eyes to the fact that within the category of public speaking, there are 4 things. There's optimizing what you say. That's building your presentation. That's storytelling. We call all of that content. There's how you say whatever the heck it is you're saying. That's being dynamic with your body and voice. Basically, we call that delivery. There's your visual aids, if you're going to use them. And then really important, perhaps the most important of all, is mindset, overcoming fear and nervousness and psychological constraints so people can show up confidently no matter what stage they're on, whether it's in a boardroom or in front of 5,000 people at a conference. So that's the starting point. Is public speaking is not a skill. Maybe you're struggling at getting better at it because you're trying to tackle the whole thing all at once. But once you divide it into content, delivery, visuals, and mindset, then we can start focusing on where you need help.
Now, I want to dig into each of those core competencies, but first of all, let's kind of zoom out for a second. There are some speakers that are just naturally charismatic, that they're amazing from the get-go. Do you feel like, and I know that this is kind of a loaded question for all of us in this space, but like, do you feel like either some speakers have it and some speakers don't? Is this something that can be taught? What's your stance on that?
I think yes and yes. Yes, I think some people have it. And yes, I think it can be taught. I think ultimately, some people are born with whatever you want to call it, the gift of gab, a natural charisma, something. But at the same time, it is a skill. Yeah. And you can improve at your ability to think. You can improve at your ability to structure your ideas, to tell a story, to put together a presentation in a nice sequence. You can improve your ability to use your body and voice, this vehicle to communicate. You can improve your perspectives on yourself and the world. In other words, enhancing your mindset and feeling more confident. You can improve your ability to make better slides to complement your ideas. So I think ultimately our philosophy here is that some people are lucky with the things that they're born with. But ultimately, all that does is it determines your starting point, but it does not determine the destination you can get to. Some people who are born with a natural charisma don't work at it. They don't hone it even further, and therefore don't get to really capitalize on what they were born with. Other people who are born with far less make a real commitment to getting better, and they take huge strides far above and beyond what people who have the natural gift can have gotten to. So I think it's yes and yes. Some people have it, yeah. Some people can develop it, but all we're looking at is where you can get to, and both people can get to the same place.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. No, go ahead.
I was going to say it better be something that we believe people can get better at, and that they're not just born with, or else we're a whole bunch of frauds, right?
Totally.
Trying to convince people that they can get better if we didn't actually believe it.
Yeah, Eli, I think you make a great point there. That it's kind of like any type of skill in life. There's some people that are born with some type of, like natural athletic ability, but just because someone is born, freakishly tall or athletic doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it. And yet there's people who who work incredibly hard to, they may not have some of the natural characteristics, but they've worked incredibly hard and become as good or better than someone who was born on, second base or whatever. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. Let's kind of go through those 4 competencies there. You said that first one there. What exactly is it that you're saying? The content there. I think this is also, it can be incredibly difficult for a speaker who's going like, I got some rough ideas of what I might want to talk about. I got a couple stories, but I'm staring at a blank screen and I don't know, or blank piece of paper. I don't even know where to begin. So walk us through, like, what's kind of the process that you might take someone through of figuring out, here's what I want to speak about. How do I make it, less about me, more about the audience? How do I do this in service of the audience? And, what's kind of the process that you would go through there?
I mean, we've got structures and frameworks and methodologies that we help people with that take a long time to unpack. But what I can tell you right now is really when someone's got a blank slate, a blank canvas, and they want to create an amazing presentation, there's really 3 things that go into creating amazing content for public speaking. So this might take a couple minutes, but I'd love to share with you
Please.
The parts of the equation for us. So imagine you're going to a conference, Grant, and there are 2 rooms, okay? And it's a conference on astrophysics. And you've got one room, one astrophysicist is going to speak. And in the other room, there's another astrophysicist that's going to speak. They're speaking at the same time. You need to go into one of those 2 rooms, okay, as an audience member. Let's say both of these speakers, they have exact same knowledge, exact same IQs, exact same experience. But the first speaker basically thinks to themselves before the presentation, I know a lot about astrophysics. I'm going to wing it. The other speaker spends some dedicated time to thinking, if I wanted to get one really important idea into the minds of my audience, this is the one nugget that I'm going to try to transfer. Which presentation do you think is going to be better?
Probably the latter.
The latter, of course, because one of the things that goes into amazing content is the clarity of your ideas. It's important to have clear ideas that are as simple to understand as you can make them. That's the first part of the equation. Make your ideas as clear as possible. The second part to the equation is, now let's say both those astrophysicists, they've already decided the one idea that I want to get across to my audience is that the universe is enormous. There are thousands of stars in the universe, okay? The first astrophysicist just says that. The universe is enormous. There are thousands of stars in the universe. The second astrophysicist, they get on stage and they do this. They say, I want you to imagine that you're on a beach. And I want you to get down on your knees on the beach, feel the sand on your knees, and then with your hand, grab a heaping handful of sand, as big as you can make it. Now I want you to imagine the grains of sand in your hand. Imagine how hard it would be to count them. Now I want you to recognize that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand, not just in your hand, but on every beach on Earth. The universe is enormous. Which presentation is more engaging? I don't even need to ask you because I know the answer. It's the second one. Of course, the exact same idea can be expressed in different ways. So that's the second piece, is it's not enough to get clear. You also have to get creative. How am I going to bring the idea to life? So you got clarity, you got creativity, and you've got one more C, because we like making things easy to understand. 3 C's of content is that obviously when you're building a presentation, your presentation is not just one clear creative idea. It's a series of ideas. And how you order those ideas, how you sequence them, how you tie them together, how you make them flow, or what we like to say, how you construct those ideas together, that's the final missing piece. Clarity, creativity, and construction. And we go deep into each one of those things to help people get better at each one of those competencies. But ultimately, that's the key, the 3 C's.
Part of the challenge of being a speaker is when you're working on a presentation, a talk, whether you're doing that in isolation or you're working with you guys or whoever, is you're kind of making an educated guess. I think this is funny. I think this will make sense. I think this will resonate. I think this will click. But you don't really know until you get up in front of the audience and you're presenting it and you get that real-time feedback, which is, one of the things that's unique about speaking that's different than, right now the 3 of us are recording this, but we'll never actually sit and watch someone, listen or watch this. If you write a book, I've never sat and watched someone read my book, but in speaking, you get that real-time feedback that just informs the presentation and makes it better over time. So when you're working on this in isolation, is this something that you feel like like how can speakers as best as possible nail it from the beginning and in the first try versus like by the 100th time, the talk's going to be much, much better because you've got that feedback over from audiences over time. Like how can they get as close to possible to nailing it first try?
That's such an interesting question. So I want to share a thought that popped in my head, and then I'm going to get to directly answering your question. But a thought that popped in my head is part of the reason that people struggle so much to get that perfect resonance from the get-go is because public speaking is one to many.
Yeah.
And inherent in that construct is lots of different people with different worldviews and opinions and biases and past experiences and levels of knowledge. And so the same message, the same idea, regardless of how it's packaged, might resonate very differently with different people. And so no matter how hard you try, I think there's this deep intuitive sense that I cannot guarantee perfect resonance.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is I think that people both refine their ideas, the clarity of it, the way that they package it and express it in a creative way, the way that they construct and sequence their ideas so it's fluid. People refine that over time. But a lot of what's happening is not sweeping changes that like, now I figured out how to make this click with everyone, but rather it's this understanding and acceptance. It's not going to click with everyone. How can I make it feel good for everyone so that the people who it's really intended for, it can pierce their souls and impact them in a deep way? So I think that's a bit of a perspective component there. Having said that, I do think there are things that speakers can do to increase the probability that things really hit home for an audience right from the start.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with the idea that every idea can be abstracted to broader and broader and broader levels or specified to deeper and deeper and more concrete levels. And oftentimes, the more broad or abstract an idea is, the more relevant it is to the most people.
Yeah.
And so I think what I encourage a lot of speakers to do is when you sit down and you're trying to clarify what's my message, like what's the real crux of this presentation, I try to get them to think about playing with the levels of altitude of that idea. You may not change your message. This is your message. But once you understand the most abstracted version of that idea, you now understand the language that could speak to the most people. And whether you explicitly use that language or you just start to seed it into the way that you speak and the way you construct your content, it starts to have a broader appeal. So I think abstraction and specification as a tool is something you can lean on to have broader appeal from the start.
Yeah, I think that, and this probably ties into that last point on in terms of just mindset is the way that you become better as a speaker is you speak. And, the first time you do it and the 100th time you do it and the 1,000th time you do it are going to be different. And the more you do it, the more comfortable and confident. If you just start to get a sense of like, I think this is going to work. I almost think of it like a chef making a new dish. If you're a brand new cook chef, I don't know squat about cooking. So I'm making a very educated guess, but it's probably going to be crap. But if I've, been a trained chef for decades, I can probably get pretty close to getting it right the first time around, but it's still going to require some, iterations and tweaks and adjustments. And I think that viewing your talk as a work in progress from the beginning and not just this one presentation and then I scrap that and I start from scratch again, but kind of this living, breathing organism is a good way to look at it. All right. So we talked a little bit there on content. Let's also talk on the delivery side. So what are some of the core, you got a list of 3 here for us as well? Like give us some type of alliteration that we can go off here. Like from the delivery, what do speakers need to be thinking about or doing?
Do you want 3 E's or 2
If you
E's?
got them, I'll take what you got.
I've got 2 E's this time instead of 3 C's. All right.
Okay, I love it.
The first E is, these 2 E's, they're basically their goals. If you watch the world's best public speakers, I don't care who your favorite public speaker is. If you watch them, they're probably doing 2 things. They're keeping the audience engaged. That's E number 1. Mm-hmm. And they're making the audience feel something emotionally. That's E number 2, emotion and engagement. Engagement is important because if you're not engaging them, they're not listening. And if they're not listening, it doesn't matter what you're saying. And emotion is important because that really gets people to not just hear your ideas, but to feel your ideas deeply. And so basically when it comes to delivery, I think a lot of people, they're looking for like the tips and tricks. They're looking for things like don't say or don't put your hands in your pockets, use hand gestures instead, or, you know, things like that. We find that telling people those tips and tricks, they're ineffective. The main reason for that is deep down, everyone already knows all that stuff. So what's the point of us regurgitating it to them? You don't need to study for your public speaking exam to know that you shouldn't say when you're public speaking. So instead, we like to think of our curriculum and what we teach people from a perspective standpoint. Engage your audience and emote. And it's really simple. To engage your audience, all you got to do is change things up, because humans are attracted to changes and stimuli. And every time you change something, they're probably going to listen a little bit deeper or re-engage if they were sort of dozing off or tuning out. So to engage people, change things up. And when it comes to emotion, all you got to do is convey the emotion yourself. If you want your audience to feel joy, then act joyful, smile, and speak faster and raise your volume. And if you want them to feel somber, then slow down and frown. It's pretty intuitive there. But engagement and emotion, that's it. That's all you're trying to do with your body and voice.
When it comes to engagement, I think like where my mind goes, among other things, is using humor. And I think humor is one of those things that can be a very powerful and effective tool on stage. Like even kind of going back to the example earlier of you have two astrophysicists and, you know, they're giving the exact same talk, but one of them's kind of funny and one of them's not. Like everyone's going to be drawn to someone that's slightly funny. But I think, again, the limiting belief is most people assume like, well, I'm not funny, you know, and I'm not a comedian and that's not what I was hired for. So how do you view humor as a form of engagement, and how should that fit in for someone who doesn't feel like they're funny to begin with?
That question comes up all the time from every person at every level.
Yeah.
The most junior person to the seasoned executive, to the aspiring speaker, to the pro speaker. The question comes up all the time. And Eric and I always tell people, be funny only if you're funny.
Yeah.
If your friends and family would not describe you as funny, then for the love of God, don't be funny. Steve Jobs was not a hilarious communicator, but he was wildly effective. So it's not that funny is a requirement. It's a very, very useful tool. And if you would be described by at least some people as reasonably funny, then definitely use that tool and play into it. But what I will say is that you don't have to be funny, but I would say there's enormous value to having fun. And there's a difference between fun and humor. Humor is like getting that audible laugh and getting people to chuckle. Having fun can make a person smile. Maybe even like a little light exhale out of the nose, you know? But the willingness to have fun is something that people shy away from. They feel like once they're on a stage, there's almost this like requirement to be serious and intense.
Yeah.
But even people like Brene Brown, who talk about pretty serious and intense subjects, shame, vulnerability, she still has so much fun up there.
Yeah.
And I think fun is something I would put in the category of requirement. Funny, less so, but incredibly valuable if you can be funny.
I think that important thing to piggyback on that is that the audience takes their cues from you as the speaker. So like you're saying, if you're having fun, it's hard for the audience not to have fun. But if it looks like if it seems like you're miserable, then they're like, what? If you don't want to be here, I don't want to be here as an audience member, you know? So setting, like just realizing that you kind of set the temperature, you're the thermostat, not the thermometer for that room. So I would totally agree. Now, whenever it comes to practicing and preparing, because it's like we talked about, like the astrophysicist, it's one thing of like, I'm just knowledgeable. And so I could kind of regurgitate this. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be clear or creative, but you know, if I really spend the time to kind of practice and dial it in, how do you find that how do you strike that right balance of being prepared, but not being over prepared? Because there's certainly times where you see a speaker and it's like, they have this so memorized and dialed in, and it's just like, they're just regurgitating a script, and it's very impersonal. And it just kind of feels like they're just reading something, you know? So how do you find the balance of being prepared, but also just like being a human to engage with and connect with other humans?
Yeah, we always recommend that people do not memorize their presentations verbatim.
Yeah.
That results in just acting a little bit too robotic. Your audience can usually tell, and that's just not the best way to go. It also makes you more likely to fail, because you screw up one word and now all of a sudden, where was I in my script? What's so much better is just being really intimate with your ideas, knowing what they are, knowing how you're going to bring them to life, and then saying it slightly differently every time. But you already know your course and you already know your path so well that it doesn't matter if you say it slightly differently. So it's not that prep isn't required. You should be familiar with your content. You should practice. You should prepare. You should know where you're going, but probably not verbatim. We don't find that that's the most effective way to go. Eli came up with an amazing analogy once that has to do with the GPS systems. You know, when you're in your car and you're using Waze or Google Maps or whatever, and then there's a voice that speaks to you and they tell you what to do. They tell you 400, or in 4 miles, turn left, and in 3 miles, turn right. But here's what the GPS doesn't do. The GPS does not say, turn left, go straight, 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 turn right, go straight, go straight, go straight, go straight. That's way too much, right? Yeah. We don't need that. We just need to know where we're turning. So you as a public speaker, know where you're turning, what the checkpoints are. That's probably the better way to go.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I may have to steal that from you. I'll give credit to the Speaker Lab, and we'll let people sort it out. Okay, the other thing was visual aids. So, how do you think about visual aids? I think oftentimes, again, our minds go typically to what's on a screen. How do you feel about slides? It's something we've talked a lot about on the show. Pros and cons of slides, but what's your general philosophy on visual aids and slides?
So not required, but very useful if done right. Yes. And there's a context dependency here. I think in business, like when we're working with corporate teams, inside the walls of a corporation, of a business, of an organization with teams, slides are used all the time. And so our job is to make sure that people are using slides very effectively. When we're dealing with people who are giving all different types of higher level presentations, sometimes it's really inspirational and there's no utility to the slides. So cut it entirely. What I will say, though, is something that I think is a misconception about people with slides as one type of visual aid, if we want to focus in on slides, is that people think I'm using slides or I'm not using slides. But it's actually not true. You can have slides for some components of a presentation and then ditch the slides for other components of your presentation. It's as simple as what we call it a blackout slide, where it's basically just a black slide with a faded logo on it. It doesn't even have to be a faded logo. It could just be a faded shape, something that indicates to the audience that the slides haven't conked out. There's just nothing to see here. And so we've given presentations where there's like 5 slides in a row that really help the audience visualize an idea. And then there's just a blackout slide for the next 5 minutes of the presentation, because now we're just talking and we're unpacking things, or we're sharing a story, and a visual aid isn't going to help it. So for both people in business and people who are giving big stage presentations, visual aids are very helpful. They can be a crutch that people build for themselves rather than for the audience. You got to figure out ways to build right. And I'm sure we can talk about that if you want to. But the biggest insight I can give is if you're going to use a slide, only build the slides if they help the audience internalize an idea. And if not, toss some blackout slides in there and don't feel the need to have a slide for every single thing you're saying.
Yeah, I love the blackout slide idea. I think that's super smart. We always say like slides should be an enhancement, not a replacement for your talk. And so a speaker who's just reading off everything, you're just like, well, what are you doing up there? It's not a script for all of us just to follow along as you spout it off. So if the litmus test is like, if your slides go down 5 minutes before your talk and the technology doesn't work and the PowerPoint breaks and the projector it falls apart, like your talk should still be good and it still should stand on its own, and slides just make it slightly better but they can't, it can't be like, I can't give my presentation because the slide doesn't work. Like then your talk isn't ready to begin with. So we talked about slides, but slides are just a visual aid. There's a lot of other ones. Even as you were describing the astrophysicist, I was like, man, if he had a handful of sand and it's falling out of his hand, like just the visual of that, what other visuals, like how do you guys think about props, and what other visual aids do you guys recommend or teach?
Really, we don't have too much of an opinion on props. I've got a personal take on props, though this is just an opinion. And like Eli said, if I was in an audience, I would just be one person in that audience.
Yeah.
I sort of find that sometimes props seem a little bit tacky, a little bit bland, a little bit, that feeling that an audience gets when someone is clearly regurgitating a script verbatim.
Yeah.
I sort of get that feeling when they bust out a prop from their pocket too. Like, this is all now a little bit too pre-planned and it's not feeling authentic. It's not feeling off the cuff, and it's not feeling the way I want it to feel. Yeah. That said, there are exceptions. Like the example with the sand would be pretty cool if there was sand on that stage, but I think it worked without the sand too. Totally. So I don't have much of I don't have much advice that I can give on props or other visual aids. All I have is an opinion, which is we usually go with either a slide or no slide, depending on if this is going to enhance or detract from our presentation. We very rarely use props just because that's sort of a feeling that it gives me, but that's not the answer. That's just,
no, I'm with you. Like, I think it can come across hokey and gimmicky. And if it's done well, if something is done well, like you mentioned there, does this feel like something that they've done 100 times and this is just part of the shtick? Or does this feel like people want to feel like, oh, this has never happened before. And, oh, you had to be there type of experience. And so a speaker can do something hundreds of times, but make it feel like this is the first time it's happened. I saw a good friend of mine, a speaker recently, and he did like this audio cue with the AV guy. And it was supposed to be an audio cue, but he made it like, oh, the AV guy played it at the wrong time. And I was like, oh, this is awkward. How's he going to get out of this? And he kind of played it off well. But then like, as it went on, I was like, oh, this is part of it. But it didn't feel hokey. I was like, that was so well done that even me, who's going like, I know how the sleight of hand is done, man, you had me like, oh, dude, that was so good, So it has to come across as like genuine and well thought through. Otherwise, you're like, this is dumb, and people start to like tune out.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because it made me think of someone that does sort of what you were describing and that does props really well, which is Bo Burnham. Have you heard of Bo Burnham, the comedian?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So he's basically my favorite comedian on earth, and he is so good at using props and AV to his advantage. And I think the reason why it comes across so good is because he's doing it with his tongue in his cheek, right? Yeah. He understands the meta. He knows what you're thinking. He's poking fun at it and at himself as he's doing it. So we're all in this together, as opposed to trying to do something really profound when you pull out like this card from your grandmother from your pocket that you do every time,
But the thing with like a bow is there's so much AV involved with it and the lighting, but it's so tight. And it's so like, the timing of everything is so crisp, and it's not any dead air there. And then it just like the whole thing falls apart. But his stuff is just so tight that like it just works. And it's like you said, the engagement is just switching, one thing after another. Okay, let's go to the last one here. Mindset. As we all know, like public speaking is the biggest fear for most people, and even more so than death. And so the idea of getting up in front of an audience and saying anything just feels totally ludicrous and insane. And this is the path of career that we've all chosen. So, what are those things that speakers can learn or build confidence in, so that when they get up, they're like, hey, I feel those butterflies. I feel that fear. I feel that nerves, but I'm not going to let it become debilitating. I'm going to use it as a, something that helps me to focus in and just become a better communicator.
Yeah, so when we think about helping people with public speaking, like Eric said, there's content delivery, visuals, and mindset. Yeah. Content delivery and visuals, those are the competencies. Mindset is this other thing. It's the philosophy. It's the psychology. If you get really good at the competencies, it can feed your mindset. And so part of what we like to do is make the content delivery and visual stuff really, really easy, like the simplest thing in the world. A lot of times people think that expressing yourself in a dynamic way is so difficult. And then when we point out to them, like, you can use silence, you're not talking right now, you're clearly able to do it, you're just not willing to. What we start to get people to recognize is that all the stuff that's required from a competency perspective, it's all stuff they're already very, very competent at. And what we end up starting to do is shift the entire conversation to what's preventing you from doing it. And that's the ultimate barrier. And what's preventing people from doing it is a lack of willingness to be imperfect in front of a crowd. It's this fear of screwing up, because it's not just failure, it's failure at scale. It's this fear of judgment. What will people think of me? And it's this catastrophizing of the consequences of failure or judgment. And so what we try to get people to do is maybe a little different than what might be the typical approach, is we don't actually ever try to get people to get rid of the fear. Because the fear, two things. One, very difficult to get rid of the fear.
Totally, yeah.
And two, it doesn't actually serve you that much. What
Agreed.
Really serves you is to actually start adding courage. So we try to get people to shift, to move away from this game of subtraction and to move towards this game of addition. Add more courage, add more courage. How can you have so much courage that you're so willing to look like an idiot in front of people in the pursuit of growth and betterment and having more impact and having more value. And when we get people into that state where they've shifted away from worrying about the fear entirely to only worrying about increasing their willingness to play and indulge in this game of progress, that's when the mindset piece starts to unlock for people.
Yeah, I think there's so much truth to that when you feel those nerves, if anything, it's kind of your body's way of reminding you like, hey, heads up, like this is important, like this matters,
Yeah.
Lena. I find that if I didn't get nervous or if I didn't have those butterflies, then it's almost like it doesn't, I don't care, which is not how you want to be as a speaker. You want to go into it like, hey, you better lock in here right now, big guy. Cause like, this matters. This has the potential to have a big impact on people. And so if anything, that having those emotions, having those feelings is a good thing. But how do you make sure that it doesn't become debilitating or overwhelming? Because, stage fright is a real thing. And like, what if I get up there and like, I'm supposed to give this 45-minute keynote and 5 minutes in, I just lose my train of thought or I forget where I'm going. And, how do you build some of that confidence? Is it just something that comes with time, or is there anything else we can do behind the scenes to get more, to gain more confidence?
Repeated desensitization, aka just taking time and practice to overcome a fear, that works, but people normally don't have that much time and they want results faster. So we try to help them get them faster. There's two ways through fear, in our opinion, in our research, whatever. The first way through fear, and let's talk specifically, obviously, about public speaking fear. The first way through fear is understanding the fear. Why am I afraid? What am I afraid of? Is this part of how I'm built as a human? We break it down. We teach people the evolutionary biology behind public speaking fear. It's in your DNA. So understanding your fear, that's step number one. Because when you understand your fear better, you can kind of start to outsmart it. It becomes defanged and you can run mental circles around it. And that's a really good thing to do. So first is understanding. And the second is action. Repeated desensitization is some form of action, but what we prefer is extreme action rather than repeatedly doing the same action. So for example, Grant, let's say you had a fear of flying. So here on the ground or on this podcast right now, I could teach you about flying, teach you what turbulence is, teach you the statistics about why it's so safe. But at the end of the day, I'm not really going to get you over your fear of flying until I take you in an airplane. Yeah. Or maybe even better yet, take you skydiving, right? And if you realize you're okay, even in that extreme version of your fear, maybe you'll be okay in every other version of that fear. So when it comes to public speaking, we need to get people on the hot seat too. And we need to get them doing the things they're afraid of. So for some people, that's speaking off the cuff. Well, then we're going to force you to speak off the cuff until you actually say something good. And then you'll be less afraid of it. If for some people, it's I'm really afraid of using silence. Well, then guess what? We need to do a silence exercise with you. For other people, it's using facial expressions or controlling their volume, yelling maybe from stage, whatever it is you're afraid of. That's what we need to do. And we need to do it right now. And we need to do the most extreme version of it. And we find that has really lasting impact.
The other thing that speakers, among other things that they struggle with from just a mentality standpoint, is kind of just this imposter syndrome of like, who am I to be up here? And I think, again, everybody at all ages and stages feels this and just has this, I don't know why they would pay me to stand up on stage and say some things. I'm not bringing anything to the table. How do we deal with this imposter syndrome? This, the devil on the shoulder is just like, you shouldn't be up there. Like, how do we overcome that?
I think firstly, part of the reason people feel that imposter syndrome so ubiquitously, just everyone feels it. Yeah. It is not just because we don't think we're good enough. It's also because we assume everyone else is. Yeah. And by comparison, then being intimate with our flaws in front of a sea of people who have no flaws, we feel a very deep sense of inadequacy. Right. But so one thing I encourage people to do is start to recognize like everybody is flawed. There isn't a person on the planet who would even self-identify as perfect, except for maybe some narcissists or psychopaths out there. Yeah. But for the most part, us human beings, we all look in the mirror and we all see a flawed specimen. Yeah. And when you acknowledge that truth about everyone around you, it allows you to accept that you being flawed is okay. So I like that vantage point on how to deal with imposter syndrome a little bit, is to recognize it's not just thinking you're not good enough. It's also a belief that everyone else is.
Yeah.
The other thing that I like to remind myself of, so I'll just speak from personal experience here, because I suffer from that stuff too. Like I'm constantly questioning if I'm good enough. And then if I ever achieve something that almost validates, hey, I am good enough, the target now moves and I think I'm not good enough for that next level, right? It's just a constant battle. And something that I remind myself of all the time in every facet, in public speaking and entrepreneurship, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, is that I'm a work in progress. And as long as you have progress as the North Star, then it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to be flawed. It's okay to screw up. It's okay to get judged, because all of those become the inputs that help you become even better.
Yeah.
And so that frame of mind is, I think, ultimately what helps. There's no fast tactic or strategy. It's just about planting those seeds in someone's mind so deeply that it starts to actually color the way they experience themselves in the world.
There's one more thing I can add with imposter syndrome. People, I think, when they suffer from imposter syndrome, they think that they need to be an expert, like the world's leading expert on whatever they're talking about, in order to deserve stage. I think that equally as good as expertise is passion. If you really care about what you're talking about, that's just as good as expertise. Care is contagious. Passion is contagious to an audience. So whether you're an expert or not, maybe ask yourself a different question. Do I care about what I'm speaking about?
Yeah.
Now, if that answer is also no, then maybe you shouldn't be on stage talking about this thing today. But if you can find passion in what you're speaking about, that's just as good as expertise.
Yeah. Very well said. Fellas, yeah, go ahead.
Can I share one other thought on that piece too? Because on the expertise thing, there are a lot of people who think I am an expert in this, but I'm not the single greatest expert on the planet. And therefore, I don't know if I'm going to be able to give enough value to this audience.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is important to recognize is that the same idea can be expressed 1,000 different ways. That's back to that creativity stuff that Eric was talking about earlier. And when you share your idea, even if it's a known idea in the world, but you share it your way through your stories, your experiences, your unique creative analogies and metaphors and interesting ways to package that idea, the audience may not have heard it your way. And that allows you to feel confident to show up and say, I may tell you something you already know, but I'm certainly going to tell it to you in a way that you haven't heard it before, because I'm telling it to you my unique way. And oftentimes, human beings need to hear the same idea multiple times before it pierces their head and heart and it starts to change them. And so I remind myself, I might tell you something you've already heard before, but I might tell it to you in a way that you haven't heard before.
Yeah.
And this might be the one time that breaks the camel's back, the one straw, and all of a sudden now it starts to shift you. And so I like to remind myself of that stuff too. You don't have to be the number one expert. You do have to have some expertise, but you also have to have some uniqueness in the way that you package your stuff. And that's actually very valuable.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that, the three of us know a lot about speaking, but there's also people that we look up to, admire, and respect, and like, oh, but I don't know as much as they do, and if I'm going to see an astrophysicist speak, they're going like, well, I'm not the astrophysicist. There's plenty of astrophysicists that know more. And I was like, yeah, I'm coming to hear you speak, and you're a step ahead of me. So I don't need you to be light years ahead of me. I need you to be a step or two ahead of me. So, kind of recognizing that there's always going to be people that know more about this, but like you're the one that's up on stage in front of the audience at that time. So you need to be a expert. You don't need to be the expert of all experts. So, fellas, this is super, super good. Really appreciate you taking a minute to share this stuff with us. There's a lot more I know we could get into and cover. We'll have to do this again sometime soon. If you want to find out more about you, not to create any confusion online, but where can we find each other? Where can we find you guys?
No confusion if you go to speakerlabs.ca. So not the Speaker Lab, that's you, Grant. It's speakerlabs.ca. If you see some orange branding, you're talking to Grant. And if you see some green and black branding, that's us.
Perfect. Fellas, thanks for the time. This is really good stuff.
So glad we got to do it.